Okay. Well, it's nice to see everyone, many frequent flyers, as it were. I know we always say that, but we just appreciate you availing yourselves of our resources throughout this application process. Hello, once again, Natalie Elliott, New Schools Manager and the Charter Division, and my colleague John Garland is here as well. We are going to have a discussion from Dr. Pappas and team about special population best practices. But before we get into that, John's going to provide you some reminders and norms for today's session.
Hey everybody, again, as Natalie said, I see some familiar names, so welcome back. Yeah, quick reminders, some of them are the same ones you've heard every week, a couple new ones. So first reminder is that I send you a reminder email today, our weekly update emails. Again, if you're not getting those, please reach out. We have gotten a couple bounce backs. So if you are one of those people, please let us know. And then also just wanted to let you know within that email, whether you got it or not, that last week's support seminar is available for review online. So that link is in the email. However, if you don't have that email, you can just go to the website and you'll find it there. And then just as a really quick reminder for the public meetings, just as a reminder, you all need to do public meetings. And you need to, when you send those email notifications out to the elected officials, you need to CC us to the extent possible on those emails so we know that you're having that public meeting, and then we can update our website. So just as a reminder, in terms of some norms, I just want to remind everybody in terms of scope of questions, right? So today, like all the other support seminars, we want to ground those questions in the application process and really kind of either A, in line with special populations, or B, in line with the application as a whole. If you have other questions, we can certainly try to address those if there's time, but we kind of want to keep within the sandbox, just again, those questions that relate to special populations and questions that relate to the application as a whole. I want to remind everyone, please, if you do have questions you don't need to use the raise your hand function. Please just use the Q&A function and we will either address it within the Q&A interface or we'll address it live. Other than that, I just wanted to say thank you all for coming. And then Natalie, I think you want to kind of ground our conversation today in some criteria.
Yes, so we are about to have a presentation from Dr. Scarlett Pappas of the Department of Monitoring, Review, and Support, and her teammates, Janelle Weber and Morgan Phillip Hubbard. Now, these folks are experts in terms of special populations. So we really want you to ask questions and explore the resources that they provide in today's conversation. But we also want to start by providing our own resource, which is just a reminder that the aim of the application is to meet the evaluation criteria that are provided in the resource pages. We know that the special population section is pretty robust. And so we just wanted to quickly spend a little bit of time reviewing some of the look-fors that are going to be things that Dr. Pappas and team share with you again today. So in particular, we're looking for, adequate numbers of special education and bilingual ESL staffing, right? For the numbers that you're projecting to serve in this proposed school, are you also providing a realistic number of specialists and supports for those students? Also, is there a capacity to address the needs of students with disabilities, including child find requirements and the evaluation process, both of which I imagine will be discussed today. And as well as how to address the needs of students through a continuum of services. What does that look like in your school? And how are you going to ensure FAPE or free access to public education in all contexts of the school? And if you're offering any type of secondary, or you're planning to offer any type of secondary programming, how are you going to make sure that students at the age of 14 are receiving that transition planning in their IEP meetings and development? And then additionally, how are you going to plan to assess for over-identification of student groups within special education programs? And then because they are special populations too, remember that you also are going to be evaluated, your application will be evaluated on how well your plan is developed to address the needs of ELs, which include all of these mentioned here in this criteria about access to grade levels content, plans for monitoring, how to exit those students and make sure that they access every aspect of the school program, and as well as educational and emotional needs of underperforming and at-risk students. And then on top of all of that, your sponsoring entity board is also going to be accountable for how to continually evaluate the effectiveness of special populations programming and how those students are being served and how successful they are in your academic model. So these are all things that we're looking for and that we really just want to draw your attention to. We know it's a lot. We don't expect you to read every word on these slides, but just a quick summary of the criteria that appear in the application that pertain specifically to the topics that will be discussed today. And so with that introduction, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Pappas to present. If you want to share your screen, go for it.
Me unmute myself first, and then yes, I will gladly do so. Thank you for that introduction. All right, are we seeing a good version of my screen, not the notes section, but the actual, can I get a thumbs up?
Yep, you're good.
Awesome sauce. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to kick this off by saying greetings and thank you for joining us today. Again, my name is Dr. Scarlett Pappas. I manage special education monitoring in charter and virtual schools. I'm also joined here today by Morgan Phillips Hubbard and Janelle Weber, who are absolutely amazing. They help us do most of the desk reviews, and my director, Denise Mayanes. We will definitely be monitoring the questions, so please don't mind putting them in there. But I want to start by saying together we are committed to high expectations and strong systems to achieve equitable outcomes for every student with a disability in the state of Texas. Today we have three primary objectives. The first two are to share some of the current relevant data. Again, this data changes, so we're going to go over it a little bit briefly. Again, I'm not going to walk too deep into our process for monitoring special education services because I know that this particular panel are people who are really curious about the applications. So instead, what we're going to do is go into the frequently asked questions and really encourage you guys to ask any questions there. So we like to start by thinking about the children and the mission of the Texas Education Agency. Of course, this number is constantly changing, but we have over 5 million students receiving a free and public education in Texas each and every day. And we want them to all be prepared for success in college, a career, or the military. When we drill down on that number, we have approximately 11% of our students in special education receiving service, or about 11% of students in special education receive services. What you have kind of grayed out here are the emergent bilingual students, represent 20%. 8% are gifted and talented, and 7% are provided 504 services. The reason we have these grayed out is because although these are special populations of students, and we do expect to see needs addressed by that in your profile or in your application, today we are specifically focusing on special education. One of the pieces of background information to know is that there are 13 eligibility categories that are recognized by IDA. Almost a third of the students with disabilities are students with a specific learning disability. However, when you are preparing that application, I do recommend that school leaders have a contingency plan or a scenario for every single one of these possible categories of disabilities. All right, so without further ado, we will go ahead and jump into a high level of our monitoring process. So the Department of Review and Support at the TEA strives to improve the special education monitoring process for Texas local education agencies, often referred to as LEAs. The differentiated monitoring and support system, also referred to frequently as the DMS process, is designed to assist all local agencies in improving services and facilitating positive outcomes for students. The differentiated monitoring and support system consists of 2 special education program monitoring pathways. We do have targeted reviews and cyclical reviews. Both monitoring pathways analyze data related to federal and state compliance. In both cyclical and targeted monitoring pathways, many review activities are completed through what we call a desk review. In some cases, an LEA might also engage in an on-site review, and all EAs will complete a self-assessment at the local level each year to support the development of an improvement plan to support the continuous improvement of special education programming for students with disabilities. Again, if you are awarded a charter, your LEA will have to participate in a cyclical review on a 6-year rotating schedule. Cyclical reviews are intended to provide a comprehensive analysis of the LEA special education program, including a review of the LEA special education policies and procedures. Each cycle is a school year, and it has 3 groups. So group 1 runs generally from October to December, group 2 is January to March, and group 3 is April to June. Cyclical monitoring schedules are published on the TEA website in 2-year increments. LEAs participating in cyclical monitoring will receive correspondence from the TEA at the start of the school year and throughout the monitoring process. Linked at the bottom are the cyclical reviews. These lists are updated to show the addition of new charters after year 1. Most LEAs start preparing for the cyclical review in the year prior. However, preparing for a cyclical review should not involve a heavy lift or change how your special education program operates. Instead, it should be how your LEA provides services every day. I share this again because these are day 1. When the doors open, this is the expectation that everything's ready to go. I didn't move our little things forward. There you go. Now you have your links. All right, and this is what we're going to spend the most of our time on, and this is going to be our frequently asked questions that we get from applicants. So, who supports special education populations or special populations of students? That would be everyone. Every single person who works in an LEA is going to be providing support for students. So as we look at special education requirements, we need to know that they are federal, and so they are the same for all LEAs. Admission cannot be denied because a student has an individual education plan or is identified as a student with a disability. Child find is a requirement, and it must be reported every single year. All requirements for academic, functional, and related services must be described and implemented in the IEP. When you see the initials LRE, LRE stands for least restrictive environment. We'll talk more about that as we go through the deck. And lastly, you must have certified special education staff to conduct evaluations, oversee the implementation of accommodations by an instructional assistant, or implement modifications to the curriculum. I know that that is some language is a little bit different for your general education teachers, but this is absolutely required for special education. So here we have a picture of our big themes in our self-assessment. I like to think of the self-assessment as a guidepost for looking at the strengths and weaknesses of a special education program. The graphic shows each area an LEA should consider in a systemic review of your special education program. The blue represents 7 prioritized areas. However, all compliance items are now required for completion. So these are all aligned with those DMS domains of implementation, student outcomes, and family engagement that we look at to assist LEAs in focusing on systemic improvement that are inclusive of compliance and best practices to improve services to support students with disabilities. Okay, please consider who will complete evaluations carefully and ensure they meet all of the requirements. For example, parental consent is one of the first pieces of the evaluation process. That consent must be in the native language of the parent, describe the evaluation procedures, and ensure that the parent agrees to that evaluation in writing, but understands that it is voluntary and it can be revoked. Please also know that the day the student receives that signed consent, that triggers a timeline for completing the report. If you have questions about special education staff requirements, please review the federal and state requirements. In brief, all charters have the same requirements as all other LEAs to provide special education services. And this is where you're also going to have that information about special education teacher certifications. Many charter LEAs contract with a third-party provider to complete evaluations or provide those related services. Please understand that the charter is still responsible for all oversight and compliance. So think about those timelines and how quickly that third party can turn those things around. IEPs are legally binding. There is a lot of information that must be documented in the IEP. For example, the Admissions Review and Dismissal Committee, or ARD Committee is what we often refer to it in Texas as. They must make decisions about the accommodations, the modifications, the frequency and the duration of services. You must consider if extended school year services should apply. Transition plans, and if there are any trainings that need to be provided to staff to meet the needs of the student. The PLAF is something you may or may not have heard of before. PLAAFP stands for the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. That means that the ARD committee must consider multiple factors, including the student's strengths and academic and non-academic needs in the development of the IEP. Therefore, the PLAF must establish the overall baseline of the strengths and needs to determine the annual goals. Now let's go into our least restrictive environment a little bit more. Our students with disabilities must receive an environment with must receive their services in an environment with non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate. So schools must ensure a student is not removed from the general education environment unless the nature or the severity of the disability is such that the student cannot be educated with supplementary aids or services. I don't see anything coming in on the Q&A deck. Do I need to take a pause or anything?
There are no questions.
Okay, I'm going to keep moving along, guys. Let's see. All right. The federal requirement also requires that every LEA has a continuum of alternative placements to meet the needs of a student with a disability. That continuum must include instruction in regular classes or mainstream instruction. It must, special education classes, a lot of times referred to as a resource classroom. A self-contained setting means that the student is instructed away from non-disabled peers for more than half of the day. And charter schools must also have a plan for if a student requires placement in a special school or home instruction or hospital instruction. Another thing that I want to share with you is that these are just a few of the instructional arrangements and settings in Texas. You do not have to provide every single placement available, but the placement must be made available if the ARD committee determines it's required or it is an appropriate need to meet those needs of the student. A lot of what I'm presenting today is coming from information that can be found in our IEP development guidebook. It is linked here. It is a digital version of the technical assistance resource that I recommend charter schools provide their teachers and their administrators. The U.S., a lot of times we get a question about what is a Section 504 plan or how is it different from an IEP. So the U.S. Department of Education enforces Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 as amended as Section 504. It's a civil rights statute prohibiting discrimination against individuals with disabilities. Section 504 covers qualified students with disabilities who attend schools receiving federal financial assistance. To be protected under Section 504, a student must be determined to have one, a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits or a major, it impacts a life activity. And there must be a record of that impairment, and the person must be regarded as having the impairment. So in addition to 504, Section 504 requires that districts provide these students faith in their just jurisdictions with a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. Don't worry, I'm going to go into it a little bit more. So here is your difference. Who qualifies for special education services? A student may have a disability, but not need special education services. However, to qualify for special education services, the student must have an identified disability, and as a result of the disability, requires special education services or related services. So here are helpful tips for complying with child find requirements. Let me get my graphics moving. Provide orientation and training to your staff. This is a documentation and timelines that the charter must be able to support. Again, this is something you will provide annually to TEA. Take an active approach in identifying students with disabilities. The law states that LEAs may not wait for others to refer students for services or request an evaluation. Review your child find procedures regularly. Look for opportunities to improve continuously on identifying students who may have a disability. Generate factors that may trigger a need to refer a student for an evaluation. For an example, an LEA may not deny or delay an initial evaluation because previous interventions have not been implemented. So let me paraphrase that by saying you can't tell someone, no, you won't be evaluated because you must go through RTI or MPSS. Consider the various needs a student with an identified disability may need in each of those 13 categories. Okay, and special education students or general education students first. Most will receive special education or related services in the general education setting. Therefore, please make sure that you are considering how those general education teachers and special education teachers may work together and collaborate to make sure that students are receiving services and also reaching for high achievement.
I just want to come off mute and interject really briefly.
Sure.
So sorry, this is really golden advice right here. And I just wanted to also just draw that very clear line that these connect back to some of the criteria that I voiced over at the beginning of the presentation. This advice is tailored because this team also has reviewed applications during the internal analysis phase in the past. Yeah. And so they know what they're looking for. And we have fine-tuned our criteria to better align with what they're looking for as well. So I just really want to draw some attention to this, like really, really sage input here. So thank you for letting me interrupt very briefly.
Thank you. What we're providing largely is the what. What I'm interested in is how you're going to do it. Okay. So who can make referrals for an evaluation? Parents and legal guardians, school personnel, or any other person involved in the education or care of that student. Lastly, and this is a real sticking point, referrals can be made verbally and they aren't really required to be in writing. LEAs must respond to those requests within 15 days. And before an evaluation can begin, the parent must be notified and provided procedural safeguards. Again, I said this earlier, I'm going to state it again. An LEA may not deny a referral or delay an initial evaluation because pre-referral interventions have not been implemented with a student. Okay. Again, this is going over your specific timeline. How long do you have to complete an initial evaluation? Again, think about if you're contracting with someone, you want to know or have contingencies in there that that you will get these within timeline, because if you're out of compliance, it's not that third party that gets held accountable. It's the LEA. So it's 15 days to respond to a request for evaluation. It is 45 days after you have consent from the family to do that full and individual initial evaluation. And 30 calendar days after that, the ARD committee must be held to provide the services based on that disability. Who attends ARD committee meetings? This graphic, I love this graphic because it could be a variety of people and it depends on what's going to happen in that meeting. So the ARD committee is responsible for the IEP development and decision-making during the ARD. IEPs must be reviewed at least annually and more often as appropriate. As appropriate includes some of the following reasons: lack of progress towards annual goals, reevaluating results, or when there's a reevaluation, eligibility determination, and any other matter to meet the student's anticipated needs. So again, what you see in blue, these are your required members of ARD meetings. What you see in purple are ARD committee meeting members that may or may not be invited. Successfully implementing specially designed instruction. Specially designed instruction means that content is being adapted, methodology may be changed, or the delivery of the instruction is specific to meet the needs of a student and ensure that the student has access to the general education curriculum. These specially designed instruction are what must be implemented by somebody with a certification. Let's see. Transportation. Transportation is a related service in special education. Therefore, if the ARD committee determines that a student will require transportation to meet the needs of services described in the IEP, then transportation must be provided by the LEA. We have fantastic networks and education service centers, our ESCs. If you need to know more about special education, please reach out to them. What you're seeing on here are some of our documents that I encourage you to find. Again, we have them hyperlinked here to make it nice and easy for you. But these are going to give you a little bit more detail on the issues that I have highlighted here. And last but not least, again, that we link to more resources. There are more than just these two state networks, but these are the two. These are two that I just wanted to highlight because I think that you'll probably start there. But again, please go to the linked resources and get in touch with any of the state networks and see what resources are available. Last but not least is the contact information for myself and my ESs. And that is the high level view that I wanted to present to people today. So what can I answer for you?
Yes, we would like to just take this time to strongly urge any of you or the questions that you may have surrounding special populations planning to just take this time. That's what it's for. These are the folks who can answer your questions. So we're going to wait on the line a little bit and hope that some questions trickle in. Please don't be afraid to ask anything at this point. We're here for you.
So there's a question about the 11% of students in special populations. Does that include gifted and talented ESL and 504? No. That is specifically students who are receiving special education services. Now, having said that, there are students that receive that are bilingual and also have received special education services. So it's a really good question. But in general, that particular information that I represented was specifically to just counting how the percentage there. Okay. There's also some questions about dyslexia. Yes, we do. We have resources for dyslexia specifically and the updated guidance. So again, when you go to that linked resources, there are some very specific ones. There are also some webinars that we have that are available and address dyslexia specifically. Thank you for that question. We have one question that says, what would be an effective continuous improvement process for special education in general? In general, I am going to say do your annual self-assessment. Review materials on the self-assessment. That really is a comprehensive look at your entire special education program, where you as the LEA with colleagues look at your program and judge where are we? Are we developed, or are we achieving high expectations for this, and decide on what your critical needs are. Please, by all means, Denise, Janelle, Morgan, if y'all have anything you'd love to add to that, please do.
I added the link to the information on the self-assessment into the chat for the Q&A.
Thank you. With regard to the board, it says since the board has to evaluate the effectiveness of programs for special education, would it be useful for the board to hire an external consultant if the board does not have an expert in this area? I'm going to say you guys are going to have to make those determinations based on conversations that you have internally. I'm not going to give you guidance there specifically on what to do or who to hire or any of that. Sorry.
I would just sort of interject here and say, just in terms of bringing it back to some general guidance, it's always helpful to recruit a board member who may have familiarity with special education services, whether they, in their capacity as a parent of a student who receives services or having that kind of educational background. Obviously, we traditionally see at least one board member and a lot of charter boards who has extensive educational leadership experience and would be familiar with that. But I just kind of want to circle back also to a lot of the insights that Dr. Pappas shared in the FAQ section, which is just that, you do have to serve all the students that enter your door, right? So how are you going to plan for having the capacity to do so, which is also the language of the criteria. So whatever resources you need to pull, whatever folks you need to, hire, that is all the sort of planning oriented thinking that we're looking for in the application, as reflected again in the criteria. Good questions, everybody. Let's keep it going if we can.
Without questions, I just am going to have a big head and think, wow, I did such an amazing job of picking these questions. Y'all know it all. It's going to be great.
Remember also that, the first criteria, which admittedly I kind of skipped over, is asking for a pretty accurate projection of special education students or special populations students that the school will be serving, based on the demographics in the area. And so that is, obviously it's our first bullet because it's really the starting place for determining what your vision for the level of services and the continuum of services that you may need to provide will be. So that's why it's there, and why it's first in the application. And from there, you kind of then enter in the process of how can we anticipate the needs of these students and develop the capacity to serve them.
Just going to interject really quick, circle back around to the consultant piece, just sort of bridging two concepts. We have this, but we also had our conversation last week just about financial planning and those questions that typically pop up. And so tying this back to consultants, consultants typically don't work for free. I think we all kind of know that. So it's very important that if you do go down a route with consultation, that you've at least budgeted for it. Because again, while it may sound good on paper, I guarantee you the financial team, should you get to interview, will have questions like, where did you budget for this, for these services? How much are they tied to enrollment, things like that. So if you do hire consultants, we just need to see that budgeted somewhere in the financial plan workbook and that it's viable. Just wanted to add that 2 cents.
Okay, and another person is asking, what does it mean to take an active approach to child find? Could this include web postings, partnerships, and etc.? Absolutely. Yes, it does. It does include public responses, and that is one of the things that I really encourage you to look at both our Child Find Network and in that resource for providing Child Find, because that active approach, it does have really specific information about those public postings and other ways to engage with families, and resources that you should provide on your website and things of that nature. But when I think of an active approach to Child Find, I really do think about making sure that I have staffing that can allow for completing those evaluations, and encouraging referrals if a student or if a teacher truly believes that a student has a disability. I think sometimes there's a fear there. And thinking about over-identification, under what circumstances would it be appropriate? That's a big one to dive into. I think I would cover Child Find every year, but that's just me personally, and I'm slightly biased to the topic. I just want to say thank you again to Morgan, who is putting in some links that can very easily be shared with you guys as I reference them in these statements.
All right, we're going to give everybody about 30 more seconds because I think the questions have somewhat slowed down. So about 30 seconds, we'll go ahead and call it a day.
I mean, we're happy to give you your time back, but we also want to provide this opportunity for Q&A. So it is your time to use. And actually, on that note, please remember that this is our last in the consecutive series of support seminars. Starting next week, we'll be starting the office hours that went out in the email, the reminder email that John mentioned at the top of the show, so to speak. So if you go back to your application team and you look at this section and realize that you have some unanswered questions that you didn't get to address today, feel free to bring those to the office hour sessions that take place on Zoom starting next week. Now, to clarify, we do have one final support seminar, and that one will be our team presenting to you the week of application deadline, just to reiterate the steps and best practices for application submission. So this isn't the last of the support seminars, but we are about to transition to office hours where, feel free to bring any of the questions that have arisen as a result of the past several weeks of support seminars. And if we cannot answer them ourselves, we will farm them out to the appropriate staff who can hold forth and be the expert, and we'll get back to you with them. But again, it's our prerogative to provide space for you to ask questions and support you as you complete your applications to the best of our ability. All right, and with that, I did not see any new questions come in the Q&A. So we can adjourn about 15 minutes early. Thank you all for participating. Thank you all. Thanks to the Special Populations Monitoring and Support folks for presenting and being here as valuable resources. And again, if y'all have questions for us to pass along to them, we would be happy to as they arise. Otherwise, we hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and maybe we'll see you next week at office hours.
Yeah, my gift to you in that time would be to take the time to dig into those resources and get to know the review and support website, because special education is just not something you can learn in an hour.
Well said. Okay, thanks everyone. We will see you on the other side at some point. Have a great day.